tying it back to the revenue driving piece, does this piece of content bring revenue to the business, or does it have another type of value to reach your goals? Because that's really important too, especially if you're a small business or a startup that has, like I said, limited resources.
Welcome to the Simple and Smart SEO Show podcast, where we talk all things brand building SEO, helping you connect with your audience, elevate your visibility, and grow your business. I'm your host, Waddell, here to bridge the gap between SEO strategy and real-world business success by bringing you insights, stories, and conversations from the SEO community and beyond. Whether you're an entrepreneur, marketer, or SEO enthusiast, this is your place to learn, share, and build a brand that stands out. So grab a coffee or your favorite tea, and let's dive into smarter SEO for your business. Welcome back to the Simple and Smart SEO Show podcast. I'm so excited to be here with Alyssa Corso, who is a Brighton SEO speaker and someone that I cross paths with again on LinkedIn. The streets of LinkedIn, they're so friendly. But Alyssa, you are an SEO consultant at your own company. So could you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Crystal, for having me on this show. Like Crystal said, I'm Alyssa Corso. I'm an SEO consultant at my own business. It's called Alyssa Corso LLC. I focus on helping startups and healthcare companies grow their traffic and revenue through organic search. I help through a blog focused content strategy and other optimizations on their website. I ended up at Brighton SEO in San Diego because I actually attended my first Brighton conference in the UK last April 2024. And I enjoyed it so much and thought the speakers were so talented and awesome. I wanted to put in my shot to speak at the next one in the US. So I pitched about how to update content to increase traffic and revenue because it's a topic that I really enjoy. I like to work on it myself and get into the weeds with the data and analytics and even into the CMS to update that content. And then I was invited to speak in November of 2024. So I had an amazing time, met so many awesome SEOs and got great feedback on my talk. And I'm so grateful and appreciative of it. And I'm actually really excited to potentially speak at another talk in the future.
Awesome. I love that. And you mentioned that your talk was targeted to traffic revenue, which I think is so important because in SEO, sometimes it seems like we speak in these abstract terms, measurables that don't actually equal money. And so I was just wondering, how did you make that connection between traffic and revenue?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. It's really important to have that connection to revenue in SEO. And the main reason, actually, how I connected it was to really focus on the keywords that drive the most revenue to the company. And that's what I really focused on toward the end of my talk, which was what are your money keywords? Like, what are the keywords that are driving revenue to your business? And oftentimes for a lot of companies, it's transactional type keywords, like people who are looking to make a purchase, but also keywords that are highly relevant to the company, which sometimes you don't really find those out until later on, right? Like you have to actually produce SEO content to see. So I talked a little bit about how you could find those keywords, which is through just engagement and to create posts and then update them to drive more traffic. And then ultimately the revenue flows in through that. So that's how I made that connection. And that's also how I went through it in my talk to identify those things.
That is so interesting. And I think one thing that I can pull out of that immediately is that you just have to do it and then you learn through the doing. And I think that makes so many people uncomfortable because I feel like people want to be able to start with the exact answer. One thing that I feel like life kind of reveals, but SEO definitely reveals, is that what you think is not always what is reality. And there's more opportunities on the other side of trying than not trying at all or being afraid to start. And so what I hear from you, start, see what resonates. And then how do you pull from that? Like, what's the process then for identifying what makes sense for your specific brand?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing when you're looking to just start is to really identify those topic clusters, those areas of your business that you know that your target audience is already thinking about. So as I mentioned, I work a lot in healthcare. So a lot of times those are health conditions, right? Like they are the health conditions that your company is helping the user to manage their condition or find a medication or find a virtual solution. Those are some of the areas that I've worked there in the past. So identify those health conditions straight out and then go a little deeper and say, what can I write about or what type of page can I put on my website that will find those users? One example, just quickly, is if you're targeting people with diabetes and you know that they're looking for a certain medication to manage it, you might also want to have a topic cluster on lifestyle changes, foods to eat, different ways to exercise, things like that, because those are like parallel or they're running alongside the other topics of medication and management. So you know that those people are similar to the people who are looking for medication. So identifying those topics, you can produce content around those. And the whole idea of updating it is to stay relevant and to stay competitive. So that's also what you want to bake into your process. How am I managing this content? If it has been published for over 6 months and it only has 20 clicks per month, something like that, and I know that the traffic volume is higher than that, how can I update my content so that I could stay relevant and then also show Google that we are authoritative on this topic and I'm going to update my content to make it more valuable to the reader and therefore rank higher up. So those are some things that you can consider when you're making a process.
That is such an awesome segue into this concept of content decay. And could you please explain what content decay is? And then we can discuss further this process for updating content.
Absolutely. So content decay is the natural decay in the traffic that your article will experience after it's published and live on your website. There are several different phases. The first phase in the content decay process is the spike phase. After you publish your content for the first time, you might see a growth, like a spike in traffic essentially, but then you might lose some of that traffic in the trial phase. Also, this process, it could take actually like a couple of years or most likely a couple of months after you first publish it. And this is essentially what you're likely going to see. After the trial phase, you'll then enter the growth phase where you're going to see a significant growth in the traffic. But then it'll probably plateau. So you're not seeing much growth. You're not seeing much of a decline. It's staying steady. But then essentially you're going to lose a majority of your traffic in the decay phase. So this is the main idea where traffic updates are very relevant, because I read a study done by animals where if you actually update your content after the decay phase, you could see an increase in weekly traffic by 65%. So essentially, you're delaying the decay phase and prolonging the life of your content and the traffic that you're going to see there.
Okay, so you said after the spike phase, did you call it the trial phase?
The trial phase. So like it just like declines, like a trowel.
Trowel, Trowel.
Troughh.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
I Googled to make sure I was like pronouncing it correctly, and it's a strange word.
Yeah, no. Okay. So that makes sense, because I was like, what's the trial? What trial are we doing? Okay, perfect. I'll make sure that is like the captions match up with that.
Yep.
So how did you even become aware of this and become interested in it and realize like this is the process of how you should update your content?
Yes. So it actually really stems from having a startup background, working with a small company that doesn't have much resources. So you don't necessarily have the budget to be pumping out new content all the time. You primarily want to make the most out of the content that you already produced. That's really where it comes from for me. But the way that I became aware of this is just researching how do I properly update a piece of content so that I'm making the most out of the money that we already invested into it, and the resources, of course, time, and other people that you're working with to produce this. So that's really where it stems from. And then from there, I've also just have done trial and error, which is what I spoke about in the first portion of my talk, which is that in the beginning, when I started doing SEO, I was just updating content just because it felt like it needed an update or a refresh. I wasn't really being very strategic about my process. And you do see like little blips of increases of traffic when you do that. But what the goal is that you have a whole system going where you can predict that once you conduct an update, you'll see a traffic increase, not just like an update here or an update there.
So are you using tools like Google Search Console or Google Analytics to see when to do this or when to implement the strategy of updating the content?
Yes. I use 3 tools primarily. Google Analytics, definitely. You can just compare the last 90 days to the previous 90 days or 3 months, whichever you want to do, and just get a view of what the traffic performance, is it going down? Is it increasing? Is it plateauing? That will give you an idea of where you are in the content decay process after you publish your article. You could also, of course, use Google Search Console and use clicks and impressions to get an idea. You could also look at average position. If you notice that the average position is going up and your article is getting pushed down, essentially, then maybe it's time for an update. But I also like to use a tool called SEO Gets, because it takes the information from Google Search Console and makes it into a really nice, where you can clearly see your content that's decaying and content that's growing. And that's just a great way. That's just a great tool to visualize all of that as well.
What was that tool called again?
SEOgets.com.
So I've always wondered how best to use the compare feature in, say, Google Search Console. So that's really great to see an actual use case. And you mentioned that the process can take anywhere from 6 months to a couple of years. How do you know which timeline to follow?
Yeah, the way that I think when you conduct a content update, you don't necessarily have to make sure it's already decaying, right? Like ideally, you want to actually get ahead of it. So if you're noticing like slight traffic decline and then you put your keyword into Google and you notice that your competitors are actually like frequently updating the content, maybe every 6 months or even every 5 months, then that could be an indicator that you should update your content as well, because it would seem that Google is prioritizing the fresher content, especially if it's a YMYL niche. I can't emphasize that enough, because that means the content is impacting someone's life and there might be some new research or information that you should incorporate. If you aren't in a YMYL niche and maybe your competitors aren't really refreshing their content, then you might want to just look at the traffic patterns of the page and identify where you might be falling in the content decay process. So if you're actually noticing a plateau, then maybe that is actually where you're going to update, because you're not yet reaching the decay and it's going to be easier to recover or actually grow the traffic instead of just seeing a decline or a decay, which will end up happening inevitably next. I also just want to add another aspect of this, which is Google algorithm updates. I mentioned this in my talk because it's actually very important to consider this, because Google algorithm updates can impact the content decay phases and process. If a Google algorithm update occurs, you might notice that your piece of content actually reaches the decay phase a lot faster or a lot sooner than it would have maybe if one didn't occur. And that's, of course, because there are different aspects that go into the algorithm update. But I actually emphasize caution here and to not overreact and say, now we need a content update right now, because it could ultimately hurt you in the long run because you were reactive. Maybe you changed too much of the content and you didn't make it more helpful to the user, and instead just reacted to an update for the algorithm. So that's just a piece of advice that I would give, because that can impact in the long run your content strategy and your content update strategy.
And it makes me think too, okay, how do you prioritize which content to do first? Is there do you put a spreadsheet together of all of your content? And then a caveat question too is, what about if you have content that's old, but it continues to rank? Does that fall in that category of leave it alone? Because I've always heard that if it's already ranking number 1, 2, or 3, leave it. But what do you think, that is like a blanket statement, or is there a checklist to follow in terms of what to update when?
Absolutely. So for your first question on deciding what content to update and how to decide, it depends on what kind of process you have in place. I think my favorite process to have in place is a Monday board, or you could simply use a Google Sheet, where if the article was published more than 6 months ago, you have some sort of formula or automation going on where it says this is ready for an update. It doesn't mean you have to update it. You could then cross-check your competitors. You can cross-check the traffic. There's so many things to check. It just is indicating a simple timeline of this has been published for 6 months and you might want to take a look. So that's one way to just identify. But another portion, just tying it back to the revenue driving piece, is that does this piece of content bring revenue to the business, or does it have another type of value to reach your goals? Because that's really important too, especially if you're a small business or a startup that has, like I said, limited resources. It might not be worth to bring an article out of the decay phase if it's not bringing revenue or any value to your business. So that's one area that I want to advise people on. Ask yourself, how does this impact my business and why am I updating it?
How do you determine if it's bringing revenue? Do you set up a specific event in GA4, or how do you measure that?
Yes. So to determine if the content is bringing in revenue, you could set up an event in GA4 for what you consider a conversion. You can also use tools like Amplitude or other conversion tracking tools. I like to use UTM links for this reason, so that you know where the conversion is coming from. So yes, you could set up a conversion for whatever that looks like. Maybe it's a purchase, especially if you're e-com, or if you're a SaaS business, whatever your sort of funnel looks like. Once that person reaches that step, it's considered a conversion. But for SEO blog content, I also think other metrics are super important here too, which is the click-through rate. Are people clicking in to your funnel or the purchasing step at all? Because if they are, and that's a high click-through rate, there might be other opportunities to optimize there. Could you perhaps improve the funnel to make it shorter or more pleasant for the user, especially if they're in the top of funnel or middle funnel and are exploring your product? Or could you get an email? Email capture is great too. It would indicate that someone is interested in learning more and staying connected to your brand. So these are events that I would encourage people to track because they are indicators of revenue driving content when people are landing on the pages.
Thanks for joining us today. This is part 1 of 2 of my interview with Alyssa Corso. So make sure you check out the next episode to hear part 2.